So let's begin. B'shulchan aruch Rabbeinu Hazaken Hilchos Sukkah. So in the Shulchan Aruch of the Alter Rebbe, in the laws of Sukkah, the Alter Rebbe, as you know, the founder of Chabad, famous for his authorship of two classic works, the Tanya, of course, and the Shulchan Aruch. There are many authors of the Shulchan Aruch, different Shulchan Aruchs. There's the original Shulchan Aruch, as it's called, the set table by Rabbi Yosef Cairo. And then there is many other works of Jewish law, and the Alter Rebbe's is called Shulchan Aruch of the Alter Rebbe. And there's the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, written very recently, and many other halachic texts which deal with daily life that are called Shulchan Aruch, like a set table. The point being, a set table is you don't have to work to prepare the food; it's all there to be consumed. So the laws are laid out without having to labor through what is the halacha and what is whose opinion is followed, etc. It's all prepared for you. That's why it's called Shulchan Aruch. Anyway, so the Shulchan Aruch, the Alter Rebbe writes in Hilchos Sukkah as follows, quote, Afal pish amra Torah, even though the Torah says with respect to the Sukkah as follows, quote, in Parshas Re'eh, which we recently read, it says, Chag HaSukkos ta'aseh lach. The festival of Sukkot you should make for you. Now the word for you would seem superfluous, from which our sages derive, therefore, that lacha means shalacha. The sukkah has to belong to you. Kloima, meaning, shetei sukkah shelcha v'loi shel chaveircha. The sukkah has to belong to you and not your fellow. That's what the word lacha comes to teach us in the pasuk. The Alter Rebbe continues, nonetheless, a person discharges his obligation b'sukkah she'ula, in a borrowed sukkah. Doesn't have to be actually yours, but you must have permission to use it. Since he enters with permission of the owner, in the case of a borrowed sukkah, it's his. But the Torah says it's got to be yours, so he adds in the brackets, V'lo nemar l'cha, and the word l'cha was not stated, from which our sages derived mishalcha. It's got to be yours, ella only l'haitzi esakzula, to exclude a stolen sukkah, or to enter into the sukkah without permission. Then you would not be yaitze. But if a person enters with permission, is yaitze. That's the halacha. Clear? So in summary, what does the Alter Rebbe say? The Alter Rebbe says that a person fulfills yaitze the mitzvah in a borrowed sukkah, since he is entering with permission. And the Torah says yours, it's coming to exclude, it doesn't mean to say absolute ownership. It means to exclude, by the word yours, a stolen sukkah. Now, just 1 second. And what's the Alter Rebbe's source? Right, the Shulchan Aruch, as I just told you, is a set table, all of the halachas, culled, distilled from the Gemara and the subsequent Rishonim, the Goinim and the Rishonim and the Achronim. So what's his source? Das Chachamim b'Sukkah. It's the opinion of the Chachamim quoted in Tractate Sukkah. There the Gemara says, quote, The Svira Lahu, the Chachamim hold, quoting now the Gemara in Masechta Sukkah, the Yafa Pish Amrein Adam Yaitzi de Chavasa Biyamtim Varish, Belulavishal Chaverai. Even though the Chachamim said, even though they, referring to the earlier sages, said that a person is not Yaitza on Sukkahs on the first day of Sukkahs, in particular, with the lulav of one's fellow, he can't use somebody else's lulav to fulfill the mitzvah. In brackets, why not? Because the pasuk says explicitly, "V'lakachtem lachem," you shall take for you on the first day the 4 kinds. Ksiv mishalachem. It means it's got to be yours. Which, by the way, as we always point out, that when you go around, as you must do, seeing that other Yidden should fulfill the mitzvah of the 4 kinds, you should really say that you're giving it to them as a gift on the condition to return. And that is 100% acceptable because it's a gift, it's theirs, but it has a time frame that, once you've done the mitzvah, return it. So for the time that they're holding a lulav and esrog, it is absolutely theirs, like a gift, a conditional gift. So that's important to say that when you give people your lulav and esrog to bench over it on the first day of Yom Tov, because we just learned that Torah says explicitly it's got to be yours. Now the Sukkah, so the Chachamim continue in the Gemara. Sukkah is different. A Sukkah, you can fulfill the mitzvah in somebody else's Sukkah. It doesn't have to actually belong to you. Now, what's the source that they bring? The Chsiv, because the pasuk says in Parshas Emor, the Torah says, "Kol Ezrach b'Yisrael," all the citizens, literally, of the Jewish people, all the Jewish people, Yeshva b'Sukkah, should dwell in Sukkahs. That's what the Torah says. Everybody has to dwell in a Sukkah for the 7 days of Sukkahs. But from here we learn, from the phraseology of this, our sages learned. Malamed comes to teach us, again the quote says, all the Jews should dwell in Sukkahs. Should call Yisrael, a beautiful teaching that all Israel is ru'uyim, is worthy, leishe b'sukkah achas, to be in one sukkah. I mentioned yesterday in the course the end of my drasha yesterday, I mentioned this, that there's no limitation on the size of a sukkah, and this is the source of it. There are very precise limitations on the height of the sukkah and hundreds of other halachas. If it's more than 20 cubits high, the sukkah is invalid, because it doesn't fall under the category of a temporary dwelling. But the size of the sukkah, there's absolutely no limitation. It could span 1,000 miles or more. Why? Because of this pasuk. Because the pasuk says, our sages derive from the pasuk that all the Jewish people can be in one sukkah, so there's no limit. That's an aside. That's not the issue at hand now. The issue at hand now is, from here we see it doesn't have to actually belong to you. Nobody has ownership over the sukkah. It belongs to the community. It doesn't have to be yours. So that's the proof that the Chachamim bring. That's the proof that the Chachamim bring, that when it comes to a sukkah, it's different than lulav and esrog. A lulav and esrog has to actually belong to you. As I explained, you've got to give it to the person. But a sukkah doesn't have to belong to you. And the proof is that all Israel can be in one sukkah. So it would seem that that's the source of the Alter Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe made that ruling, distilled that ruling in his Shulchan Aruch. And it would seem his source is the Chachamim and the proof text of the Chachamim, but it's not. Let's see. And we'll see why not. Elo shebegemara. But if we, putting the Alter Rebbe aside now, let's just remember what the Alter Rebbe said. The Alter Rebbe said That why is a borrowed sukkah okay? Because you're going in with permission. And when the Torah says your sukkah, it just means yours and not stolen, but nothing beyond that. The Chacham don't make any mention whatsoever of coming in with permission. Their source is the pasuk that says all Jews can be in one sukkah. And we're going to explore the difference and why. So putting the Alter Rebbe aside, just learning the Gemara itself, which we just quoted, the Chachamim, we could learn, we could understand their position as follows. Namely, they said, the fact that the Torah says in Parshas Emor that all Israel can be in one sukkah, that reveals, that tells us, that elsewhere in the Torah says, in Parshas A, so when it says yours, that doesn't mean actually it has to belong to you, because the other pasuk says every Jew can be in one sukkah. So what does yours mean? It's coming to exclude it doesn't have to be actually yours. The imrak ein exul, as long as it's not stolen, must be it's enough. That's how we would understand the Gemara. But we know that the Alter Rebbe did not bring it all this pasuk from Parshas Emor. The Chol Ezek, that all Jews can be in one sukkah. But Akstam, he just, without bringing a source, he just says, if you're entering it permission, it's like it's yours. And this is significant, as we will presently see. Furthermore, Olahalon, later on, the Alter Rebbe in his Shulchan Aruch writes like this. Mechalek, he makes a distinction between sukkah and bedes bekarka shel chaverei. What if I build my sukkah on somebody else's land? Says the Alter Rebbe, the outset, as a priority, he would be told not to sit in it. It's not really his, because the sukkah might be the physical sukkah, but the ground is not. So he says not if he did already after the fact, he may discharge his obligation. But in the first place, he shouldn't. Dr. Rebbe continues, this is what's important for us to know in our discussion now. This is not like borrowing, like the case of borrowing someone's sukkah, because they're the person that allowed you. It's like yours. If you're given permission, then it's mamish like yours. But here you're on his ground. He didn't ask permission from his ground. Your sukkah is yours, but the ground is not. Therefore, he says you shouldn't use it. So what do we see from here? We see it clearly that Alter Rebbe's opinion is what's the reason that we can fulfill our obligation in a borrowed sukkah? It's not because, as we would deduce from the Chachamim, it's not because for sukkah it's enough, if it's not actually yours. Unlike the four kinds where you have to actually own it, the sukkah you don't have to actually own it. But in the case of when you borrow, it is considered like yours. It's also implied by the levush. In other words, the Alter Rebbe is saying that when you borrow, he doesn't learn the permissibility from a pasuk. He doesn't need a pasuk in Parshas Emor. He uses it as a logical thing, and that is he considers that if you are, he's saying that when you go into a sukkah that's borrowed, it's considered like yours, mamish like yours. Now, if it's considered mamish like yours, you have to understand. So why then, according to him, if that's the reasoning, if it's permission, it's like yours, why doesn't it apply also to the four kinds? So we'll see. And that's the question now. In other words, let's get this clear. According to the Chachamim, we don't have any question. According to the Chachamim, the reason that you can be in the sukkah, a borrowed sukkah, is not because if it's borrowed, it's just like it's yours. They say we have a pasuk. There's a special pasuk in Pashas Emor that says all Jews can be in one sukkah. So it comes to teach us that it doesn't have to be yours. And also when it says yours, just means don't steal it. But the Alter Rebbe is not saying it. It doesn't invoke a pasuk. The Alter Rebbe uses a simple, like logical, legal, logical explanation. If you're entering into the sukkah by permission, you're granted permission, you're invited, you're a guest in the sukkah, right? And it's like yours. That's why you can invite guests into your sukkah and they fulfill their mitzvah. Because when you invite them into your sukkah, it's like theirs. That's his reasoning, not because of the pasuk in Parshas Emor. He doesn't need a verse to come and teach me this novel law. He deduces it by logic. So then the question is, if borrowing is considered yours, why wouldn't it apply to the lulav and esrog as well? That's our question. According to the Chachamim, we don't have the question because the Chachamim have the pasuk that comes to teach us that the sukkah is different. Only mentions sukkah, doesn't mention lulav and esrog. It doesn't say all Jews are worthy to use one lulav and esrog. Doesn't say that.
Could I have a question?
No, let me just finish. All it says is, in a second, one second, I'll make this clear. All it says is that all Jews are worthy to be in one sukkah. So since the Chachamim, their leniency is derived from a pasuk that only talks about the sukkah, it doesn't apply to lulav and esrog. But the Rebbe is not using the pasuk. He's using a general idea. So if it's a general idea, it should apply to everything. It should apply to the four kinds as well. That's our question. What's your question?
As a guest in your home or anybody's home, I can't assume that the house is mine. Same way as a sukkah isn't mine just because I've guessed it.
No.
In other words, as a guest, you're saying, according to Alter Rebbe, as a guest, it's as if it's his house. It's not borrowing it, it's his house. So why is it not his house when he comes for dinner Friday night, not in the sukkah?
Because it doesn't have to be. It's irrelevant. Since the halacha is that the sukkah has to be yours, so it's implicit that when you're inviting someone to your sukkah, why are you doing that? Because you want them to fulfill the mitzvah. So implicit is that the sukkah, while they're there, it's like it's theirs. The fact that you allow them to come in grants them a kind of an ownership, a partnership in the sukkah. You're only doing that because that's what's required to fulfill the mitzvah. When you're inviting them to their home, when you're inviting
them, not for you. You have no obligation. It's their obligation to sit in the sukkah, not yours for them to sit.
But you're inviting them.
Because sure, the same way you invite them for any other dinner.
Okay, so what's your question?
So my question:
you invite in the same way when you invite someone to dinner, you're giving them food, and they're eating the food.
Yes, but it doesn't imply anything about
eating the food. So you want them to eat the food, and it's kind of like it's their portion of food. You've given them the food. That's the whole point.
Only the food, not the house.
That's why, because that's all that's relevant there. But now what's relevant here is the sukkah. So it's sukkah. So you're inviting to the sukkah. You're inviting them to fulfill the mitzvah. So you're granting them like a partnership, a permission over the sukkah. That's the whole point that you're inviting them. On a regular home, it's not relevant. But in the sukkah, it is. But mind you understand the difference? Because that's the whole point why you're inviting them. You don't want to invite them to your house not to fulfill the mitzvah. You want them to fulfill the mitzvah.
Can I interject?
So, yes, but I have a sukkah myself in my house, right?
Answer my question.
No.
Do you want to fulfill the mitzvah or not?
Pardon me?
Do you want to fulfill the mitzvah or not? Do you?
Of course.
Is that why you invited them?
But that's not the only reason they're
Is
being
that why?
invited.
Is that why you invited them? It could be 1,000 other reasons too. Is that
Right.
also why you invited them? Is it yes or no?
I'd have to say yes. But I mean, not necessarily.
That's it.
But yeah.
Because
I have to eat the sukkah, so if they're coming to my house, I can't have them sit there. They're coming to sit with me, for argument's sake. So it's not this. It's a very subtle.
You keep on like digressing.
Yeah,
Answer me head on.
Yeah.
Head on. You invited them into the sukkah. Do you want them to fulfill the mitzvah of the sukkah? Yes or no?
Yes, you do.
Yes, finished. So since that's what you want, and by your invitation to the sukkah, you want to fulfill the mitzvah. And the mitzvah of sukkah means that there has to be this element of ownership, and it's implicit in your invitation, come to my sukkah. Even if you don't even know. But that's what the construct, the mitzvah of sukkah is. So that invitation is an invitation that grants them an element of ownership. What's that element? The fact that you allowed them into your sukkah, that element of ownership is implicit because that's how the mitzvah is fulfilled. And it doesn't apply in the same way to a regular house because when you invite them to your house, it's just the meal. It's nothing to do with the house itself. The sukkah is all about the sukkah. So it's a different implied intent, even if you're not aware of the halakhic construct. That's what it is. But mind you, I'll give you another answer that will say your house is the same. It's the same. What happens if someone by mistake breaks a utensil in your house? I'm talking halachically. You invited them Friday night and they broke a utensil. So if it was done by accident, there's whatever the case is, the utensil was inside. They weren't negligent. There was no negligence. Or even a more extreme case, you had some very, here's the case. Here's the case. No, here's the case. You invited someone to your house. They open the door and walk in, and right there, it's impossible not to see it. You have these vases. This is a case in the Gemara, the Mishnah, and they break them. Are they liable or not? So the answer is they're not, because you invited them into the house. So there's this element here, even we invite them to the house, that they have permission to be there. So it's like, see, this element of, so it's as like opposed to if someone came into your house without permission, uninvited, and broke the utensils, even though he couldn't help it, he'd be liable because you shouldn't be here in the first place. So we see that even in your house, there's this element of, if you invite someone into your property, there's an implicit kind of element of you're allowed to be here. That means some kind of partnership with me on some level. Where do you see that? That if you break something that you didn't see, you're not liable. You broke it. I'm here with permission. So there is this element, even in a house, not even a sukkah. You see? So thank you for your question. That brought this to light.
Thank you. The Rabbi meaning, obviously, it is a whole different story.
Now we're trying to understand. Now that's our question right now is. We only have a question of the Alter Rebbe. We don't have a question from the sages. The sages made the distinction between the Arba Minim and the Sukkah based on the Pasuk. And the Pasuk only talks about a Sukkah. So that's the end of the story. In other words, in both cases, the Torah says yours. Your Sukkah, your Arba Minim. The Chachamim say, yeah, but there's a third Pasuk. The third Pasuk says, all Jews can be one Sukkah. Comes to teach us when it comes to the Sukkah. It doesn't have to actually be yours. It just means don't steal it. But if it's borrowed, it's okay. But the Alter Rebbe doesn't invoke a third pasuk. He says logic. Logic is if it's borrowed, it's just like yours. So if it's logic, it should apply to that b'minim. That's the question the Rebbe is asking now. You follow? We only have this problem with the Alter Rebbe, not with the Chachamim in the Mishnah, because they made the sukkah an exception based on a pasuk, on a verse, and that pasuk only mentions the sukkah. So we only have the exception for the sukkah. Otherwise, yours means yours, and that's the end of the story. Borrowed, it is no good. But the Alter Rebbe says, why can you be in someone else's sukkah? Because it's by permission. It's by permission, it's just like it's yours, and why shouldn't it apply to the Arba Minim? That's our question. Clear? Very, very simple question. Are we clear?
Rabbi,
Huh?
Rabbi, I just want to ask you a question.
Yeah.
If I'm walking, if I'm doing, let's say, I'm walking on the street and I'm thirsty and I want to eat something, and I see a sukkah that belongs to somebody's house, can I just walk into his sukkah, make a bracha in the sukkah, and leave without permission, asking the host?
No, okay, the question is, we're talking about the first night of Sukkot. There's two issues here. The first night of Sukkot is when it's a mitzvah to eat in the Sukkah, you're obligated to eat in the Sukkah. If this would be the first night of Sukkot and you're going in to make Kiddush, and you didn't have, no.
You can't go into somebody's sukkah and make Kiddush Friday.
You need permission. You need permission.
You need permission.
Or you go into a public Sukkah that's made in a shul, that's made to begin with for everybody to be able to use.
Okay.
But it's not so simple. If it's someone that you know, if it's someone that is known, you don't have to know him personally, but is known to that he's hospitable and he's a kind of, you know, that he's a kind of person that would welcome people in his sukkah, then you could. So I would assume that someone came into your sukkah, you'd be thrilled.
Yes, of course.
Yes, I would be. So we could assume it's not so black and white. We have to just know the person. That if we assume he's a Lubavitcher for sure. If it's a Chabadnik, you can be sure you're Yoitze because he wants his sukkah to be, you know. Yeah. But if it's someone who's, you know, it's his property, what he's doing my property, and it's particular, then you wouldn't be able to go in, you know. No.
Okay.
To knock on the door, say, "Can I use your sukkah, please, for a moment?"
Okay. And what, like you said before, it doesn't apply to Arba meaning. There's a total different thing to the.
Which we have to understand why. We don't know why yet.
Okay.
At this stage, we don't know why. Again, the Chachamim, we do know why it doesn't. I'm just going to mute you because we're getting. Unmute yourselves, but just when you want to speak.
Okay.
Everybody's muted. Okay. Our question is only on the Alter Rebbe, because the Chachamim, they made the Sukkah an exception based on the pasuk, and that pasuk only mentions a Sukkah, so that's the exception. It doesn't have to be only yours. And so there's three psukim. You understand? Let's get this clear. There's three psukim. There's a pasuk that says Sukkah, do Sukkah. Pasuk that says do Arba Minim, and then there's a pasuk that all Jews can dwell in one Sukkah. Now, both Sukkah and Arba Minim say yours. Yours. The Chachamim say, if we didn't have the third pasuk, then a borrowed Sukkah is no good either. Coming into permission is no good either. But we have an exception. There's a third pasuk that says all Jews can be in one Sukkah. So that teaches me that what? When it comes to the Sukkah, it's an exception. We don't have the exception for the 4 minim, so it remains. Yours is yours. You got to own it. But the Alter Rebbe says that the reason why a borrowed sukkah is okay is because it's like yours. He doesn't invoke a pasuk. He invokes an idea, a halachic construct. So why wouldn't it apply to the lulav? That's our question. The question is only on the Alter Rebbe, who doesn't use the pasuk as the making the sukkah an exception, uses logic. Well, logic should apply to both. You understand our question? Yeah?
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Okay, now we're going to try. We're going to answer. First, I've answers it like halachically.
Yeah. So in other words, the application of the logic where the person actually is partnership in the house for the sukkah, he's not partnership in the lulav and esrog, because we still have to figure out why he said that. Is that it?
We have to figure out why not. Why wouldn't the principle of, if you're using it permission, right? Why does that satisfy it's yours for the sukkah and doesn't satisfy yours for the lulav and esrog?
But we said that if you tell the person he's borrowing it, for now, it is his for now.
Oh, for sure, that's good. That's why you got to do that. We're asking, but why do you have to do that? Why can't it just be with permission, like your sukkah? Why do you have to say, I'm giving it to you as a gift?
In other words, with the sukkah, you don't have to ask for permission as long as the person is invited. Like we said, as long as the person is actually invited, it's implicit that he part owner of the sukkah.
Exactly.
Whereas in the lulav, you have to mention it, otherwise it's not.
No. It's a different it.
Uh-huh.
The lulav and esrog is not I give you permission to use my lulav and esek. A sukkah, when you're saying to the person is, you have permission to sit in my sukkah.
Because
since I gave you permission, that makes it yours also, enough to fulfill the mitzvah.
Right.
And lulav and esek, that wouldn't work. You've got to say, it is yours.
You have to actually say those words.
You should. If you don't, it's implied. Even if you don't say it, because the halacha is the halacha, we assume you have that intent.
Right, but it's not a borrowed.
It's much better to say it. You're not lending it to them.
Right.
The point is you're giving it to them. And now that we're asking, why do you have to give it? According to the Alter Rebbe, why? If borrowing is considered yours, why wouldn't it apply also to the Arba Minim? Again, our question is not on the Chachamim, because they say that Sukkah is an exception because of a pasuk, not a halachic idea. The verse told me that it's different.
Right.
And only told me Sukkah is different. Didn't tell me that the lulav, all Jews can use one lulav. It doesn't say that. Therefore, it's got to be yours, not permission, ownership, actual ownership, real ownership.
That pasuk applies still.
Pardon?
So that particular pasuk applies still, even
only to the Sukkah, but only the Sukkah. The Torah only said all Jews can sit in one Sukkah. It did not say, for example, all Jews could use one Dalet Minim.
Right. So therefore,
that would have taught me, as long as you didn't steal it, it's your yoitza.
Right. So we
don't have such a pasuk.
Right.
But the question, the Alter Rebbe does not use the pasuk at all. He uses the whole just logic. He says when you have permission, it's like considered yours. So why wouldn't it apply to the Dalet Minim?
Right. So you still have to say, in all cases, you still have to say it's yours, no matter.
But why? No, not in all cases. In Dalet Minim.
In Dalet Minim, I'm talking about.
I'm asking why. Why does the principle of permission not apply to the Dalet Minim? Why do you have to actually give it to them?
Right. By logic, it should apply.
Yeah. What's the difference?
No difference. Right.
Yeah. So we're going to give an answer first in halacha, and then al pi chasidus. Okay. Everybody has the text. Second column, al pi pashtus yesh loima. So at the simple level, we could suggest and say like this. Rak gabe sukkah ef shaloim bet shuli ki shaloim mamash. Only when it comes to sukkah, again, we're not using verses here. We're using the now logic to try and distinguish between the sukkah and the arba minim. So only by sukkah can you say that if you have permission or you borrowed it, it's like yours. Why? It would only work for sukkah, not for the four kinds. Why not? Let's hear it. The kiv and the geder shel sukkah. What's the point of a sukkah? The Torah says, Teishvu ke'ein taduru. You should dwell in the sukkah in the same way you dwell in your house. Now, the Adam Rogil, normally a person, where do you live? Does a person live in borrowed property? It's an exception. Where you live, it's yours. Either you're renting it or you bought it. People usually, the vast majority of people, live in a property, a house, an apartment that belongs to them. Not you borrow a lawnmower, friends. You don't borrow a house. You don't borrow an apartment. For a short period, you give someone your house in the holiday house to live. People do that, temporarily. But your place of residence, 99.9% of cases, you own. Therefore, the Torah says that what? The sukkah, you have to live there like you live in your house in Cain. Therefore, knowing, everybody knows this, that you have to live in the sukkah like you live in your house. So therefore, when you allow your friend into your sukkah, as we said earlier, it's implicit. This is why you're lending to him. Not like you would lend him like your holiday house to use for a few weeks. It's different. This is going to be like your home. So you have a different intent. You're actually lending him. It's a unique kind of lendership, if such a word exists, because you want to fulfill the mitzvah. So you're lending him in such a way that's actually his. Because Because if you didn't have this intent, when you lend it to him, it's not like his home. The Torah says for 7 days, you got to live in the sukkah like you live in your home. Now, just like home, for most people, almost everybody, all of the time, it almost never could happen such a thing. It belongs to you. So if you're lending with this intent. And therefore, continue, but an object, people lend objects to people. They're not lending in such a way that it's yours. They don't have this caveat, this kind of legal component. It's my lawnmower. I'm letting you use it. It's my pen. You can use it. Write with it. But he retains exclusive ownership over it. Because that's the way people, that's the way of life, that objects which you give to someone, you're not giving them ownership. You're giving them the use of it. Let's make it clear. You're giving them the use of it, not the ownership. I'm allowing you to use my lawnmower, my car, whatever you're lending. So what are you giving them? You're giving them use, not ownership. That's when it comes to objects. Now, the Torah says the only way to be yoytze the mitzvah of what? Of the sukkah is you got to own it. Therefore, if you are lending someone your sukkah, allowing them, again, like we said before, you want them to fulfill the mitzvah, then implicit is this is a home. So the mitzvah of sukkah is to be in a home. And I'm inviting you into my sukkah to fulfill the mitzvah of being in a home. Therefore, I'm inviting you in such a way that I'm granting you not just use of my sukkah, but a kind of ownership. Conclusion. To explain the difference, why by permission for the sukkah works, permission for the lulav and esrog doesn't work. The Alter Rebbe, reason, because since the Torah says that you've got to live in it, in the sukkah like your home, and since homes people own, the place of residence they own, therefore when you invite him into your sukkah, what are you doing? You're inviting him in such a way to fulfill the mitzvah. Therefore, it's not just the use, but you're granting it is a home. You're granting him like permission to live there for the time that he's sitting at your table. He becomes kind of not a partner, but a kind of owner. But objects, human, when you lend an object, you're only lending them the use. So the lulav and esrog, when you say, here, use it, being it's not a home, it's an article, you're not thinking house, because it's not a house. It's an object. So you're only lending him the use of it. And since you're only lending him the use of it, it's not really his. Doesn't fulfill his obligation. So what do we answer now? The foundation of our distinction is the difference in we made the distinction we made now is the difference in life in general between places of residence and objects. People live in place of residence, they own the place. Objects, we lend, and if you're giving someone, you're lending someone, it's not the ownership, it's the use of it. Therefore, herein lies the distinction. Since you know that you own the sukkah, it's your sukkah, and you know you're inviting someone into your sukkah. And even if you don't know, the halacha is enough to place this implicit in the whole interaction here, the whole invitation. Since the whole point is what? That this is a home, it's not like, now to draw the distinction, Jacob, between inviting someone into your house Friday night. When you invite someone to your house Friday night, what do you want them to do? You want them, the mitzvah thing. Aside from the camaraderie, the social dimension, you invite him to your Yom Tov meal. What do you want? You want him to fulfill the mitzvah. What's the mitzvah? Mitzvah is to make kiddush. The mitzvah is to eat challah. The mitzvah is to, right? So that you're giving them. You're not giving them your house, like you said before. That's not part of their mitzvah. But when you invite them into your sukkah, the Torah says the sukkah's got to be your home. Implicit in that invitation is what? Home. And home you own. But a lulav and esrog is an object. And objects, people don't, when they lend that, the lending means the permission means two different things. When it comes to objects, permission means use, not ownership. But here is home. You got to live in it. So permission means live in my sukkah. So that's the difference. In other words, it's kind of the intent of the Ellen, I'm just going to ask you you keep on unmuting yourself somehow.
I wanted to ask you a question.
Oh, okay. Then I
didn't want to.
Before you ask, I hope this is clear. What we say, so till you ask, I'm just going to mute you, okay? Because it comes out on the recording, these sounds all the time. So just mute yourself for another minute. Okay, I did it. What we'll get to the Chassidus, I guess, next week. The Chassidus is beautiful, the deeper explanation. But what is the halachic? We're saying like this. Permission means two different things when it comes to home and sukkah, and when it comes to objects. Permission by home means like a home you own. That's what the permission means, a kind of ownership. Objects, articles, permission means use. And therefore saying, you can use my lulav and esek, doesn't help, it doesn't become yours. Because implicit in that you can use is use. That's what people mean when here's my pen. They don't mean you own it. But when you're saying, here's my house, here's my sukkah, since the whole point of the sukkah is to live in it, they say, here, come into my sukkah, implicit in that is as your home and a home you own. So you're granting him a kind of ownership. Okay, now we'll get to the Chassidus. It's subtle, it's a subtle distinction, but this is what we're doing is we're distinguishing, we're making between here, come in or use. It's different for an object or a home when it comes to sukkahs. An object is here, use it. Sukkahs is your home because that's the whole mitzvah. The whole mitzvah is it's got to be your home. You got to dwell in it, not just be in it, like your home. So therefore, it's got to be ownership. And that's implicit in your invitation. Whether you're a halachic expert and you all this or not, that's what the whole mitzvah is. Okay? Alan, your question. I want to give the Chassidus answer now. So Alan, I'll take your question in a minute because I want to conclude. Let's go to the Chassidus answer. Let's finish it. It's not so long. Maybe we won't. Okay, what it's going to explain is we'll leave it for next week. Next Sunday. What's next Sunday? It's still Sukkahs.
No. Next Sunday is the Sunday night, Monday. It's Sukkahs, but it's not done.
It's Chol Moed.
It's Chol Moed. It's Erev Yontif. It's the day before Yontif. Okay. It's the day before Erev Yontif. So we'll continue. So what we're going to explain beautifully next week, this is all the halachic legal definition of lending, borrowing, different for objects, different for home when it comes to the sukkah, because it's got to be a home. Next week, he'll explain on a spiritual level. Both sukkah and the four kinds are all about Jewish unity, but there's two levels to unity. There's a level of unity conveyed by the Arba Minim, which is one kind of oneness, and there's a level of unity conveyed by the sukkah, which is far deeper, which allows for, therefore, even a borrowed sukkah. So we'll see that beautifully next week. Got to come back. Okay, Alan, your question.